Hi, and welcome to the virtual dramaturg's note for She Kills Monsters Virtual Realms. You'll notice a little theme there. Everything is virtual. That's because we're in a pandemic right now, so we can't exactly do stuff in person, and we figured making a video since we have this opportunity to do something a little different would be good. So we're just gonna start out by introducing ourselves. I'm Emily, and I'm one of the dramaturgs for this production.
I'm Melanie, and I'm one of the other dramaturgs.
I'm Karen Kessler, and I'm the director.
And I'm Grace, and I was the first assistant director.
Excellent.
Awesome. So to start off, just for people who are not as familiar, what we want to talk about what the show is about and why we feel like this is an important story to tell. Does anyone want to get us started on that one?
Well, I can start, and since I was the one that proposed the show, we were supposed to be doing another show right now, but the pandemic came, and we had already cast the other show in our heads. We knew what we were planning, and I went looking for a play that could contain the cast I had. That would and maybe some additions. In this case, we added some people too. But I chose the play because it's fun and it's sweet and it is something that makes you feel good, and it's something about getting through hard times, and it's something about finding the group of people that you fit with and working through things. And it celebrates the dorks in the world. And speaking as somebody who's always felt like I was one of the dorks in the world, I played D&D when I was in college. So I mean, I did this is a movie. This is a play that celebrates our found families and the people we learn to hang with. And right now, in the middle of this time, we need that. We need our found families. We need the people that help us get through this time, that you can just call or text and say, I'm going crazy. And they text back and go, it's going to be okay. And these are the people that populate this show. And that's why I think it's a great, and it's just fun. You know, who doesn't want to kill monsters? Fish, you got something to add to that in terms of from your point of view?
I think it's so interesting to see this show that was then like transposed for Zoom, since that's something we're all kind of like investigating now. So I also think it's like important not only for the content, but for the foundation that it's setting for what theater is at this moment in a pandemic. Like, we don't have very many options, so figuring out how we can be creative with what we have and what we can do through this platform is also like a tremendous importance to someone who's studying theater and not knowing what's going to happen next. So,
and the fact that Qui Win wrote a virtual version of this, that the play existed, it's been being done for a lot of years now, but he very sharply, very smartly, when the pandemic started to lock things down, he turned this into a virtual version, which is great for us. And hopefully more playwrights who have a play that can be done that way will think about what that means to have a virtual version of their shows. So.
The other day, I saw that someone was putting on a production of a play in The Sims.
Right.
That's so innovative.
Yeah.
I think that's so cool.
So they're just turning the computer into their stage, which is fantastic, right? We're going to have to start thinking about those ideas. I mean, we talk about it in some of our directing classes. We talk about the idea that who knows how long we'll be at this way, and B, once we're out through it and theaters start to produce again, we all have to deal with, we don't know how many theaters will be there, and it'll have to grow itself back. So for many people, especially younger people who are just starting out, and this may be the theater they get to use for a little while. So it's great for us to explore what that is. So
Yeah. I think one thing that really stuck out to me about this play, it's not to do with the Zoom or going virtual or anything, but I just love how effortlessly this play combines like the lighthearted comedy with just the heart-wrenching truthfulness of the situation. I think it's so beautifully handled, and it just feels like, you know, you never know if you're about to start laughing or crying, and I think that's awesome.
and Agnes's pain at the loss of her sister is the centerpiece of everything in the show, and how she learns to deal with it, right? And that's a big piece of it. It's a big piece of it.
When you talked about the chosen families, it reminded me of something my mom would say to me and my sister about how like you don't get to choose who your family is, but you can choose to be friends with your family. And so through the course of the play, like Agnes didn't get to choose to be Tilly's sister, but she gets to choose to be her friend throughout the play. And so it's really like moving to see how their relationship has changed.
And gets to choose to be part of the operational family that Tilly created, right? Gets welcomed into that operational family, which is lovely, right? When we're talking about that kind of thing, it's lovely to watch that stuff happen.
Yeah. So speaking of Agnes's grief, basically the way that the show starts is with Agnes losing her sister Tilly. And so there's a lot of themes in this show about grief and about the complicated relationship between siblings. How do you guys feel like the show handles those topics?
Grace, why don't you go first? Do you have something to add, or do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I do. I feel like what's amazing about this show is how clear the sibling relationship is from the beginning. We get such a good glimpse at who Tilly and Agnes were before everything went down, and it's so relatable as like a person who is an older sister to see that kind of situation play out, but for real. And with the grief, we see this like interesting portrayal where we see her, or Agnes, I should say, react differently when she's in different situations when her sister's brought up, and how she even learns to confront it around other people. Like, who does she talk about it with? Who does she go to when she needs help? Like, does she feel comfortable sharing this? And kind of figuring out, like, as a high schooler, what kind of facade do you need to keep in order to stay where you belong, quote unquote, in the whole high school environment. Yeah.
I think that's all really true. And that, to add to that, I would just say grief is weird. And grief is weird because grief never is the same for anybody. It's all the same basic feeling, but how we experience it in our life is different. And I think particularly when we lose somebody who is way too young to lose, when we lose grandma, sorry, grandma, but when we lose grandma and grandma's had a great life, it's super sad. And we all mourn grandma, but grandma's had a great life and we've had a long time with grandma. When we lose somebody, a close friend that we've only known for a couple of years, or a sibling who is younger than us and shouldn't ever be the one to die first, right? There's that. There's the fact that we don't know how to kind of place what's just happened in terms of any logical understanding. And there's also the part where you look at the sibling who's now gone and say, wait, planning on fixing this. I hadn't fixed it yet. I was going to make us better friends somehow. And then, because it's what happens sometimes, time runs out and you have no control over it. And you have to live with what you didn't do, which is bigger than just the grief. It's the piece you didn't do, that you didn't reach out the way you meant to reach out, and you didn't fix the things you meant to fix, and you didn't say the things you meant to say. And so not only are you living with your grief at the loss of the sibling or friend or family member or whoever, but you've missed a bunch of chances. And you're angry and grieving the missed chances. I think that's what I find really interesting in it, and in how she deals with that. I think Lainey's got some interesting stuff about in her research about how sibling grief is different and handled differently. So I think that would be useful to hear some of too.
Well, it's definitely what you said about how losing someone that was young, because you really think about your siblings, you think that you're going to spend the rest of your lives with each other because you're about the same age, whereas like with your parents or your grandparents, you understand that you will probably lose them at some point, whereas no one really ever thinks about that with siblings. And I read this really interesting article about this woman who had lost her sibling, and whenever she would tell people that she had lost a sibling, they'd be like, oh, your parents must be so sad, I'm so sorry for their loss, completely ignoring the fact that she lost her own sibling, a family member of her family. And it's really never explored in a lot of media. And this show like takes this unique opportunity to make it the forefront of losing a sibling.
And I think what you just said is really important, Lainey, because I think some people are not super close to their siblings. As somebody who is super close to my siblings and has been since I was young, I can't imagine having that negated, having the feeling of loss negated, because it's not the parent, I'm not the parent, or I'm not the grandparent, or I'm not the spouse, or I'm not the boyfriend or girlfriend, that somehow being a sibling puts you off to the side. And if Ken or Kelly died, I mean, someday they will, but I mean, I don't even know how I would handle that. I don't even want to think about that. You know, and my father's died. I've dealt with that kind of grief, but boy, even thinking about Kent and Kelly not being here isn't more than I can even think of. And we've been together a long time, right? So it's interesting stuff.
So one way that Agnes deals with her grief, that's, as we said, grief is unique to everyone, but one way that she does it that's kind of pretty unique is that she ends up playing this D&D module that her sister had created before she died. And she ends up finding so much more value in that game than she could have imagined. She learns about Tilly and she learns about herself. And so I just thought that was an interesting topic to bring up, about what people gain from fantasy and escapism and tabletop games like D&D.
Well, I know I just love them because it's fun to go to other worlds. I love them for the same reason I love theater. It's fun to go to other worlds. It's fun to create other worlds. And I've always been a fan of science fiction and fantasy and stuff like that. So for me, it's always been an easy jump. I mean, for me, the thing that Agnes does, besides learning to really love D&D and playing it for the rest of her life, as we're told, the thing that I really love about that is the moment when she realizes that she'd rather be a dork than a cheerleader. that there's so much more in the world than boyfriends and hair and pretty makeup and who you're going to the party with. And I mean, for me, for young women, that is so important. I love the message of that. I love the message of saying, embrace your inner dorkyhood, and be whatever's interesting to you. And it doesn't have to be D&D, it could be anything. But that idea of saying, we don't have to follow the rules of what young women are supposed to be like. We can kill monsters and we can enjoy it, and we can go do whatever that is that says. So it's the fantasy, but it's also, there's some feminism in them that I really like too, because it's like saying, go have fun. It's not about which boy finds me pretty. It's about, what monster am I going to get to kill today? What dragon do I get to fight? And then later, if you want to think about what boy thinks you're pretty, that's great, but also go kill the dragon. And I just think it's a wonderful message for young women. I think it's a wonderful message.
Mm-hmm.
I personally had never played D&D, and I only kind of understood it before I got into this show, but I have always been an avid bookworm and reader, for the same exact reasons, and the same reasons why I love theater and directing. And you learn so much about other people, I think, when you get to go to these worlds and learn about these characters, even if they are fantastical and may not actually exist. There's so much you learn about other people and how their brains work, and you gain a sense of empathy for others that I think a lot of people are missing nowadays. And I think it's really interesting to get to see these characters learn about themselves by portraying these fantastical creatures. That's really beautiful in an amazing way.
And the role playing of playing bad guys, right? It's fun to play demons and bad guys, and people are horrible. And it's fun to do that. Back when I used to be an actor a long time ago, when I used to act, I loved playing bad guys because it's just fun to be rotten. It's just fun to do that and be, and just cause trouble for people and say, what does Lilith say? I mean, can I eat him? She sees somebody and she goes, that would make a good lunch. And it's just fun to play those kind of characters that have that kind of outrageous behavior, because we don't get to do it in the world. It's fun to be outrageous. That's why people go to Rocky Horror, right? Because it's fun to be outrageous.
I also really like how there is the line in the show about how the game is like a diary, chronicle the real things that happen to you in real life, and you can have your school bully in the game and then defeat them in the game as that outlet for all the negativity in your life. But it also leads to Agnes learning more about Tilly, because that was the only space that Tilly had to really talk about these things that were happening to her, where it was a safe space for her to talk about all the trouble in her life.
Carmia and I were talking one time about the idea of being able to see her sister for who she really was, that not her secret life, because these other friends knew the secrets, but the piece of her that Agnes never gets to see. Carmia is the actress, for those of you watching, who plays Agnes, that we were talking about, just the idea and meeting these friends who love Tilly and think Tilly is the bomb, right? And not just because she's a great fighter in the middle of the game, but because she's got a great imagination and she's lovely and she's caring and all of these things. And to learn that about her sister, in the story. You're right, Lainey. The idea of creating a diary with your game is an interesting one, isn't it? Creating and fighting your own monsters. Fighting your own monsters, because that's what Agnes does at the end. She kills the monster of who she was and how she wasn't enough to her sister and Mr. Chance. she kills a metaphorical monster that way in the game. So
I really love how the script sort of sets Tilly's character up, because at first it's like, oh, she's the little sister and she's kind of weird. But then it just delves into, as Agnes is learning more and more about Tilly, so is the audience. And it's like everyone's getting to experience this change of perspective together. And I personally love D&D. I think it's an awesome creative outlet. And I think that the characters that people pick, race-wise and class-wise, says a lot about them, because a lot of the times people will pick you know, a character who has those traits that they wish they could have, like the confidence or whatever. And sometimes, like you said, playing the villain is fun. Sometimes people just pick characters who it's like, I would never act like this in real life, but I kind of want to try it, so I'm gonna try it in this make-believe world.
and that idea that Chuck, the dungeon master in the game, mentions that, you know, men play women and women play men, and we don't, we're an imaginary world. The rules don't have to apply here, you know, and it's that idea. It's that idea of the first time you see the original Star Wars and they go into that bar and there are all of those aliens, and you go, there are so many different types of bodies and faces and languages to set story on, and we don't have to be limited by mundane kind of rules. And D&D allows you to do that, you know. One of my characters was this horrible little dwarf thief that I used to play, and it was so much fun. And it was a he, and he was not a bad guy, but he wasn't a good guy. And he took care of himself and would cause trouble because he liked trouble. And that was fun. That was fun to play. I wish I remembered his name. I don't even remember his name. I remember my fighter's name, but I don't remember the thief's name.
So speaking of playing different genders, Tilly's character, her paladin, is male, and something that Agnes actually discovers by playing the game is that her sister is LGBTQ+. There's not an exact label put on her, but I wanted to talk about how that kind of shapes Agnes's perception of her sister and what her sister's life was like.
I would say, having lived with the play now for a number of weeks, I would say I would firmly put Tilly in the basic range of questioning, that she's not ready to label herself yet. She's not ready to say, this is what I am. She's questioning, and has a very, very close relationship with somebody who does identify as gay, but is not out and can't, right? So she's questioning. And I think that it's just one more way to feel like a weirdo in a family that seems very normal. I mean, the narrator spends so much time this is not a spoiler, I promise everybody, but spends so much time talking to us about how Agnes is average. And that word, the replacement word for that I gave Edgar, who plays the narrator, and Carmia, who plays Agnes, is normal. And underlining that idea of normalcy, right? And it's just one more way not to be normal. For Tilly to have to figure out how, in the world she was born into, she's an oddball. And that doesn't mean we don't hear about how her family would handle. We don't hear that she's afraid about her family finding out she may be queer in some way, right? We don't hear about that. But what we do hear about is that she doesn't know. And she's having feelings she doesn't completely understand yet. And I think it just adds to the confusion for her. And I don't think she feels particularly good about it. And without giving anything away, when people are mean about that to her in the play, it makes the confusion even worse. So I think what's really interesting about the play to me in that is it just is a very clear outlet for somebody who is questioning, or somebody who knows where somebody who knows but doesn't know how to say it, and how hard it is in our world, even now, just to say it clearly. I'm comfortable saying, here's what I am. And that's tough. It's tough. I think it must be hard at 15. I can't even imagine it at 15, being not in a place where you don't feel like you can be completely 100% clear. So.
And one of the beautiful things that Agnes learns about the game and why Tilly loves D&D so much is because there is no norm. You aren't odd for being who you are and like how you want to live your life. And I think Agnes, like, she wants answers. We want answers when we're grieving, but as she gets to learn about her sister in this moment, I think she gets to see how just beautiful D&D can be for someone who doesn't feel like they belong in our world.
And also, just sometimes Agnes is somebody who likes answers. She asks questions and wants answers. And to get to a place where Tilly looks at her after having been asked a question and she says, does it matter? And Agnes says, no, I guess not. And for her to understand that their relationship is not based on answers. It's just based on being with each other. And that's what I think you're right, Grace. I think that's what she finds in her friends, right? And the LGBTQ plus stuff is part of that. But it's also just being able to be who you are and being with people who let you be that. I mean, let's face it, all of us, right? It's one of the reasons we find theater in high school. We find the club of dorks. They happen to do theater and it becomes our safe haven. It certainly did for me in high school, right? And you find your safe haven. And sometimes it digs itself deep enough into you that you just keep staying there, right? And I mean, and it's a lovely thing that this operational family, and I always think the family must be pretty cool because both Agnes and Tilly are pretty cool, that they're cool girls. So I'm sure, I hope, maybe I'm just being a hopeful thinker, but I'm sure that if Tilly ever figured out how she wanted to be considered and came out to her parents would be accepting of her, because I have a hard time believing uncool parents could raise two such cool girls. I mean, that tends to be things that follow each other, so.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we're gonna have to stop there for time.
Okay.
But thank you everyone for tuning in to our dramaturgy note. We hope you enjoy She Kills Monsters Virtual Realms.
Yay, bye-bye.